There's a concept which both the brothers Green have espoused for years. Imagine others complexly. I believe this ended up being a running theme throughout the entirety of Vidcon. In fact, I know it to be true, as others have echoed a similar sentiment, though not in those words. First things first, of course, I was fortunate enough to be able to attend from day one on Wednesday the 21st. From the beginning, I found myself overwhelmed by the sea of strangers. This wasn't my first time attending, but last time around I didn't quite process the sheer amount of people that can be packed all in one place. At the time I couldn't imagine just what would come from this year's Vidcon, but I was excited nonetheless. The possibilities were endless, and so long as I wasn't completely socially inept, I knew I could find myself in the company of great individuals, and if I played my cards right, who knows what opportunities would make themselves known. To preemptively answer questions you may have, I imagine it would be something along the lines of, who the hell are you?
Vox Providence!
Why the hell are you making this?
That's gonna be a video, right?
The day began as my days all too often do, late. I arrived to find a hall that was not quite filled with people, but because there was a line it still felt a bit cramped. Registration was steady, if not speedy, but once outside I found myself without company. Naturally, that isn't anything new for me, so I just wandered the grounds seeing what the main plaza had to offer. There was a giant play button which would later serve as a key landmark for meetups, and a black monolith meant for people to scrawl whatever their hearts desired. Apparently, the people desire additional iDubbbz. I found other like-minded individuals, as they too were more interested in capturing what others had written rather than writing anything upon it. Not to say I blamed them. Despite the good prompt, many took the opportunity to shield their social media instead. So I suppose I passed that question on to you. What makes you awesome? Luckily, I didn't have to wait too long for the first official meetup to happen. Personally, it felt as if the entire thing was just one meetup after another, filled with periodic breaks to attend the local hotel bar. Chris Reagan, armored skeptic, shoe on head, and some black guy were the first to arrive on what was ultimately just testing the waters for what was to come. It didn't take long for them to be completely surrounded by fans, which I found to be equal parts spooky and fantastic. I can't imagine what was going through their minds. Eventually, ContraPoints and some other folks who I'm not familiar with showed up. There was a buzz about leaving the landmark to procure some foodstuffs from a local restaurant. My time was short, so I acted quickly, and did what any sensible individual in my position would do if they were loaded with too much gear and too little talent, while being surrounded with creators they admire. I asked the eternal question, are traps gay?
You want to record that?
Yeah.
Are traps gay? I'm gonna lean yes.
All right. Second question for you.
Right.
Are Fudas gay?
Food? Yes.
Technically, but we don't treat them like that.
Not if it's a feminine penis. If it's a feminine penis.
Yeah, that. Are traps gay? I'm gonna have to say, like trap music, it's very gay. Yeah. I mean, kind of. I mean.
The second day of Vidcon was a bit more productive. There was much to do and so little time to do it all in. Officially, the day should have been recognized as June Day, as it was her birthday. But we'll settle for Thursday the 22nd. I spent much of it as a hanger-on to some folks, and I appreciate their kindness in allowing me to follow them around. With more meetups comes more people, and true enough, there was a swarm of young folks ready to see June IRL. If I could barely get close enough to film footage before, then now it was an order of magnitude worse. However, I'm nothing if not optimistic, so I waited for the opportunity to present itself, before asking more questions to these fine people. While I waited, there were quite some sights to see. A gentleman with a monopod that was as long as the landmark was tall showed up for a group photo, and a proud, noble Kekstani, with scars from the battle for Berkeley, revealed his flag. Many creators ended up slapping their signatures onto it. Eventually though, I got the chance to do what I came here for.
Are hot dog sandwiches?
Oh my god, I've never thought. I just had like an internal crisis here. No.
I mean, I'd argue no.
They're not even traps. That's treasure chests.
Treasure chests. It's like a bonus. It's a bonus. You're like, oh shit. Alright,
Great. I'm in.
Alright. This one's a hard one.
Yeah, that is hard.
This is harder than the first question.
I would say no because it's a hot dog
sandwich.
But a sandwich consists of the meat and everything inside of a bun.
So no. Yeah, no.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I think you stumped me on that one.
That's harder than the traps question.
I don't know. You know what? Just put whatever you want wherever you want.
No.
Just put whatever you want wherever you want.
Look, I just judge every situation as it comes. You cross that bridge when it gets get there. A lot of variables, you know what I mean? So you go, is this? Yeah, no.
I'm not sure.
And if it is, fuck it.
Yeah, just put whatever you want wherever you want.
No.
Oh, that was quick.
What the hell kind of animal says that?
Hot dog sandwiches. No, I think they're their own subspecies of sandwich. Maybe they like evolved from the sandwich. Oh my god, I can't even get into that.
No?
That's too big of a debate for me.
No, they're something quite different. They're perhaps you could refer to it as a folded sandwich, but I think you insult the very concept of sandwiches by even comparing them.
Eventually, the crowds dissipated when Greg and June headed for the Magical Kingdom. I had lunch with Chris Raygun, Lord Desick, a guy named Guy, and some other folks. By lunch, of course, I mean I just sat down and photosynthesized some sunlight like a true breatharian, while they had some strange food from a lunch truck. After some light walking to the corner store so Mr. Raygun could fulfill his daily Snapple intake, everyone made their way to the panel that featured Cat Black. Luckily for Greg and June, they didn't miss much with the first panel. It went about as well as could be expected, but the exciting part for me was when I had the opportunity to speak with Sargon of Akkad and Vernaculus. I played my part once again and offered them the eternal questions, just to see what their thoughts on the matter were.
I can't just answer that in a quick video. That's a question with so much depth and breadth that you need to get sociologically verified. But I have it on good authority that they're not, and the penis only makes it better. No, but then I don't agree that burgers are sandwiches either.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm radical that way.
Oh, man.
Well, in a sense, traps are bisexual, if you think about it, because they look like women, but you know, once the dick appears, it's now crossed to the other side, you know what I mean? So you have to be, in a sense, kind of bisexual at that point. I don't know if I'd cross the line to gay at that point. Very centrist about the whole question. No, don't be fucking ridiculous.
Post-panel, I found myself wondering just where the wonderful Wizard of Cause was. In true Wallflower fashion, I checked my phone, which ended up proving to be rather serendipitous, as he was currently live streaming.
By the way, if you want, come around down to the cave. That's where Vernaculus and I are drinking right now, and God knows who else is going to show up.
I took a gamble, and decided to make my way down the street to the bar he was currently in. While in retrospect this may not have been the wisest course of action, I'm glad I took it because he welcomed me with open arms. In an effort to repay his kindness, I bought him a drink, and I posed to him the same questions I had been asking everyone else.
If you go to bed with someone who you think is a woman, now, and turns out to be a dude, but you fuck him anyway, if afterwards, if you were having sex with what you thought was a hot woman, you're cool with that, that's your take on the thing, well then yeah, I mean, okay. But if you had sex with this trap, and you're like, you know what, I kind of had fun playing with that dude's junk. You know, it's a little gay, and there ain't nothing wrong with that. It's more it's really a question of like, what do you think? Are you gay? Do you want to go and fuck dudes after you fuck the trap? Because if that's gay, so yeah, you're gay, or bi, or congratulations, you like to fuck dudes, that's fine. Yeah, so, I don't know. No, our trap is gay questioning, you general, I would say, is it's kind of irrelevant, really. Fuck, honestly, like, can you not think of a half dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen things that are more important to ask yourself? I mean, oh, a hot dog's a sandwich. No, it's a fucking hot dog. That's kind of the same question you asked me.
Oh, I've already asked him.
Oh, you already asked him.
Yeah, that's how he knew.
They're bisexual.
And is a hot dog a sandwich? Here's the question. Is a quesadilla a sandwich? Yeah, that's about as white an answer as you can get, huh? This ain't woke YouTube, fam. We ain't you woke YouTube, fam. It's more of a sandwich.
It's more of a panini.
Oh, he's a panini. There you go, Internet. Here we go. Brought to you by Vernaculus. The real question here is a panini actually a sandwich? I asked this because I hate you all. Fuck off.
Vernaculus, ever the responsible individual, reminded Mr. Wizard that it was time to depart and to rejoin everyone at the convention for a now infamous panel featuring one Anita Sarkeesian. Naturally, the best thing to do while walking down to a con that celebrates online video was to stream said walk.
Morning. None of 14-year-old girls. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's heaven for you. I don't know.
That's really offensive.
Oh, God. I hope my subscribers don't get really bored of these really shitty streams that I do.
Rick, I think they're already bored. I think they hate you.
The panel itself was where Anita Sarkeesian said in reference to Carl.
Heads like this dude who are making these dumbass videos that just say the same shit over and over again. And like, I hate to give you attention because you're a garbage human. Whatever, dude.
While exciting as that was, the main ticket for me was a small gathering of shitlords just outside the building. This is where I met quite a few new faces and realized that some of my work was beginning to get recognized, which was perhaps the most strangest feeling of all. I continued in my mission to obtain as many shots as possible, but unfortunately I had decided earlier that it was a good idea to film as much as the Sarkeesian panel as I could. As a consequence, my battery was low and eventually outright died. By the time it managed to regain a little under half a full charge at one of the many charging stations in the center, I discovered that the crowd had moved on. By way of Twitter, I reached out to Mr. Wizard of Cause, and he politely informed me via photograph where they went off to. Once again, I thanked him for his kindness and bought him a drink of his choosing to return the favor. The night ended with a long walk back to the local bar just outside the convention center. The day was nearly over, but the people still had plenty of energy in them. A big eye-catcher was this gentleman, Internet Comment Etiquette with Eric. While for many the night remained young, for me it was time to get going. The new day brought new challenges and a new panel for us to harass with our mere collective presence. However, first the group needed to assemble. It began with a bang. The first meetup was relatively early that afternoon. People I had seen the previous days were becoming familiar faces, and while I doubt I'll see any of them again, save for another round at next year's VidCon, it was nonetheless a small comfort to know I wasn't the only one completely out of place between the teen girls, Instagram models, and Tana Mongoose. It wasn't long before the gentleman from Poisoning the Well arrived on the scene, devouring some snacks they no doubt acquired from one of the many nearby food trucks. Eventually I broke off from the group in search of Mr. Bunty King, as I had seen on Twitter that he wanted people to go find him. Instead, I ended up finding Sargon, Tim Pool, Cassara Vera, Vernaculus, and Chris Raygun. My search eventually bore fruit, and I once again began asking the vital questions of our time.
Our top's gay.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. Yes. Yes, I would say they are. I mean, they're men that want to trap men, so it's totally that's their thing, I would imagine. No, a hot dog's a hot dog. Hot dog's a hot dog.
Hot dog's a hot dog.
I would never say I want a sandwich and then get a hot dog. I just get a hot dog. You know what I mean? If I want a sandwich, I get a sandwich. Panini press, all this stuff. Sandwiches have different things. I'd call a sub a sandwich, not a hot dog. You know what? Cereal is a kind of breakfast soup. I would say so. You know, because you can mix all kinds of shit into it. But yeah, cereal is a soup. I would 100% say that cereal is a soup.
No, just ignore all these food questions, all right? They don't know what they're talking about. They're just there to confuse you, all right? Just ignore it.
Is cereal a soup? No! You fucking degenerate!
Once back at the plot, it was time to get a move on with more moment capturing. I wasn't the only one trying to be vaguely productive, as I spotted that others had some equipment on them. But how much usage those cameras got, only they could tell you. It felt like there was a bit of a critical mass as more and more of the content creators were here that day all at once than I think at any other time during the convention. However, it wasn't long before it felt like the Morai themselves delivered a golden opportunity. There she was, towering over the crowds, none other than Blair White herself. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to ask her any of the hard-hitting questions of our day, but I did have that chance with others.
Oh, I've heard of that one before. Yes.
Yes.
Depends on the trap's sexuality.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Yes.
Oh. Like your confidence.
It's an easy question. Yeah.
A little less gusto there.
Yeah. I'll take it. I'll think about it.
Eventually, one of the big names from the app formerly known as Vine decided it would be a good idea to disregard his own safety and run through the plaza to the fountain near the landmark. Of course, it ended up causing a huge spectacle. It began with some wails off in the distance which drew attention from the folks nearby, but it quickly erupted into chaos. This excitement stirred up the group to move on into the convention center itself, so I took my chance and proceeded to speak to Lacey. Perhaps the only person there I was actually worried about speaking to, as I had watched her content in the earlier days of YouTube, when names like Venomfang X and Tooltime 9001 dominated my subscription feed.
Is cereal a soup?
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure?
If you have it with milk.
I would be like, who the fuck are you?
Why not?
I'm too I'm chicken and biscuits.
No.
I'd noticed Tim Pool sitting by himself, so naturally I took the liberty to subvert expectations and ask him questions.
Well, I suppose it depends on how you define sandwich. We have a piece of meat between two wedges of bread, although if a submarine sandwich is a sandwich, then a hot dog is also a sandwich. I suppose is cereal a soup? Cereal is a soup, depending on how you define soup. And if we define soup as food floating in a liquid, then yes. But I don't know, some people might define soup as like a savory, you know, hot. I guess it is. Yeah, I'll say yes. I have no idea. Let me say that sexuality is a spectrum, and simply by being a I don't know if it's a pejorative term or not, but a trap doesn't define whether or not you're attracted to men or women. So I would argue that the question doesn't have enough information. The question doesn't have enough information to actually answer.
It was at this point I actually began to lament not being able to sit down and properly talk to people interview fashion. The panel went as well as could be expected. There were words I took issue with, but I don't think anyone in the audience, save those who were the most dyed-in-the-wool, completely agreed. Francesca Ramsey even directly acknowledged the presence of the group. Perhaps the thing I took main issue with was a remark Francesca made. There's a reason why I have a microphone, and you don't. Once outside, people were eagerly discussing the panel, plans for the evening, and whatnot. I heard through the grapevine where exactly everyone was going to go, but once again, without an explicit invitation, I did not wish to intrude. Instead, I sought to make the most of my time, which involved getting a group shot worthy of freebooting, and briefly continued speaking with the abundance of content creators.
Is cereal a soup? It's a cold soup, I suppose, but yeah, but not like, well, soup is actually something you cook, so it wouldn't be considered a soup. So, yeah. I guess since there's bread and meat, and sometimes chili, I suppose, yes? A little.
Thank
I'm
you.
not a trap. I said I'm not a trap.
I didn't think you were.
A lot of people online think I am.
I have cereal a soup because of us saying they might not be able to get removed. Yeah, like alphabets, I guess. A hot dog. It's like a hot dog sandwich. Traps are gay, but so is everyone else.
Cereal is soup. I mean, I guess by technicality, cereal is probably a soup, but it's like a very dysfunctional soup. You know, soup's supposed to be warm. It's supposed to be hot. If you try and heat up your cereal, it's going to get curled. It's going to get all fucked up. It's dysfunctional soup. Or hot dog sandwiches. Oh, hot dogs are hot dogs. I mean, if a hot dog is put between two pieces of bread, then it's a fucked up dysfunctional sandwich. But hot dogs are sandwiches.
I wish they had given him the full redemption.
That's not even the right question. The right question is, if it was, would it stop you?
I mean, I guess they did give him the full redemption.
Early morning plans didn't quite materialize, and so I found myself on the main convention floor going back to my wallflower roots, trying to rest my blistered feet before what I knew would be a day filled with even more walking. It wouldn't be long before the midday panel featuring Boogie 2988 and Anita Sarkeesian would begin. The additional security was present from the get-go, and the front row was already occupied when I entered. I still managed to snag a good vantage point to watch and grab whatever photographs I could during it. What unfolded was, in my perspective, a battle of approaches to cyberbullying. Perhaps the best method I heard came from Megan McCarthy and Boogie 2988. The former told the story of how one day she decided to get drunk and read hate comments for a video, which is definitely a new favorite. To laugh in the face of your detractors is an insult I think the Krogan would be fond of. Anita Sarkeesian echoed sentiments about the daily grind, as she put it, and mentioned how she prefers to simply stifle conversation by disabling comments altogether. From my perspective, it seemed that Mr. 2988 was not quite confident when he began, but being met with resounding applause at the end of his points seemed to calm his nerves. It was at this point Anita seemed to be displeased. However, what I think stung her ego the most was when Mr. 2988 got the final word in and ended on a powerful note. After the panel, plenty of people stood around talking to each other about what we had just witnessed. Eventually, folks decided it was time to do some day drinking, so many loaded up and moved towards the same bar, which at this point was beginning to feel like we had spent half the time there. It was here I saw Tenamango a handful of times simply walking around. It was also here where she said hello to Sophane. Once Mr. Vernaculus and Memory arrived on the scene, a small contingent made its way to the outside world. However, to my dismay, it wasn't long before I found myself back in the bar. The conversations were good and the people were genuinely interesting to hang about with, but even the best locales eventually become tedious. Time continued its inexorable march, and I found myself outside with Nick, as well as some other gentlemen whose names I don't recall. It was at this point Nick told me he didn't remember my name, which I found to be absolutely hilarious. In an error of judgment, I kindly reminded him. I'm a bit hazy on the details, but it wasn't long before I found myself at the super secret Shitlord Syndicate station, which was none other than Mr. Holliday's hotel room. The plan was to simultaneously broadcast 2 live streams by putting the 360 cam to work and doing a special episode of the YouTube Saints. About halfway through, Mr. Failure Accomplished arrived, and like the paragon that he is, brought in and out with him. My guess it was for those who do not have the luxury of living in the Great Golden State. The bulk of the shenanigans went unrecorded on my part. I wasn't sure if I could take photos or video, but after I cleared it with Jeff, I got to work immediately, though I do regret not taking him up on his offer. Nevertheless, it was a pleasure and a privilege to be a small part of his live stream. Once the stream was over, we realized we hadn't been to the bar in a few hours, and we needed to make sure it was still there. Mr. Wizard and Mr. Holiday, along with a few others, were notably absent. Between my eyesight growing dim and my body refusing to stay upright much longer, I knew I had to leave. So I made it a point to shake everyone's hand that I had met, and say it was a pleasure to meet them, as it genuinely was. I directly messaged Nick a goodbye, and asked him to pass my regards to the Holidays. Swinging back around to the beginning, and imagining others complexly, there was a certain ineffable idea floating about the zeitgeist throughout Vidcon. In the heat of dismantling ideas via polemics and using rapier wit to attack people, it was easy to forget being the change you wished to see, a sentiment Boogie2988 was keen on reminding us. This isn't to say that criticism should be discarded in order for us to get along. Don't mistake my meaning. Authoritarians still need to be challenged, bad ideas still require critical analysis, but that should be the focus. If you made it this far, I'd like to thank you for listening to my personal account of Vidcon, and I hope that I was able to accurately show just what I was experiencing during the event. This video is brought to you by the Gilman House Hotel in Innsmouth, Massachusetts. Innsmouth, come see the scenic sights, walk the colonial streets, visit the historic Masonic Center, and stay forever.